When millionaire Ethan Brooks's luxury car died on that empty coastal road, he never imagined the woman who stopped to help would become the one person who could see right through his carefully constructed walls. Claire Whitman wasn't impressed by his wealth, wasn't intimidated by his coldness, and definitely wasn't going to let him push her away with cruel words born from years of broken trust. What started as a roadside encounter between two damaged souls would soon become a test of everything they thought they knew about love, vulnerability, and second chances. But when Ethan's past collides with Claire's present, and family obligations force them into uncharted territory, will their fragile connection survive the pressure, or will pride destroy what patience had so carefully built? Some breakdowns happen to engines, but the most important ones happen to hearts that have forgotten how to trust. If you're watching this story unfold, subscribe and tell me what city you're calling home. I love hearing from viewers around the world. The late afternoon sun painted the coastal road in shades of gold and amber. Ethan Brooks gripped the steering wheel of his midnight blue Porsche, watching the temperature gauge climb into the red zone. The engine sputtered once, twice, then died completely. "Perfect," he muttered, pulling onto the narrow shoulder. The quiet road stretched empty in both directions, lined with tall grass that swayed in the ocean breeze. He could smell salt air mixed with the acrid scent of overheated metal. Ethan stepped out and popped the hood, steam rising from the engine bay. His custom suit felt too warm, too formal for this situation. He loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, revealing the expensive watch that caught the fading sunlight. At 32, Ethan had built his fortune through careful investments and smart business moves. He owned 3 luxury car dealerships and had a private collection that most people only dreamed of seeing. But right now, none of that mattered. His phone showed no signal, and the nearest town was 5 miles away. He stared at the engine, knowing enough to recognize a coolant leak, but not enough to fix it. The irony wasn't lost on him. He sold cars for a living, but couldn't repair them. That's what mechanics were for. That's what employees were for. The sound of an approaching vehicle made him look up. A white pickup truck slowed and pulled behind his car. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was maybe 28, with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and wearing jeans stained with what looked like motor oil. Her white t-shirt had the logo of a local garage printed across the front. She approached with confident steps, her expression friendly but professional. "Car trouble?" she asked, stopping a respectful distance away. Ethan straightened, his jaw tightening automatically. He'd learned long ago to be careful about accepting help from strangers, especially on quiet roads like this. Too many people saw his expensive clothes, his luxury car, and made assumptions about what they could get from him. "I've got it handled," he said, his voice colder than he intended. The woman, Claire, according to the name embroidered on her shirt, tilted her head slightly. "Looks like a coolant leak from here. That steam's not a good sign." "I said I've got it handled." She nodded slowly but didn't move toward her truck. Instead, she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Tom's Garage. They can send a tow truck out here in about an hour." "Don't." The word came out sharper than Ethan meant it to. "I don't need your help." Claire's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained calm. "Okay, but you're going to need someone to look at that engine. That leak's not going to fix itself." Ethan turned back to the engine, pretending to examine something important. He could feel her watching him, could sense her trying to figure out what his problem was. The truth was, he didn't know himself. Something about the situation made him defensive, made him want to put walls up before she could get too close. "Look," Claire said, her voice gentler now, "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just know cars, and yours needs help." "I'm sure you do." He didn't look at her. "But I'll wait for my own mechanic." There was a pause. When Claire spoke again, her tone had changed, still polite but cooler. "Your own mechanic, of course." Ethan glanced at her then, catching something in her expression that made his chest tighten, hurt maybe, or disappointment, but she covered it quickly with a professional mask. "Well," she said, walking back toward her truck, "good luck with that." She climbed into the driver's seat but didn't immediately drive away. Through her windshield, Ethan could see her making a phone call. Probably to her garage, he thought, probably laughing about the stuck-up guy who was too proud to accept help. But Claire didn't laugh. She spoke quietly into her phone, glanced at his car once more, then ended the call. She sat there for another minute, engine running, as if debating something with herself. Finally, she got out again. "Here's the thing," she said, approaching more slowly this time. "That coolant leak is going to get worse if you keep running the engine, and if you blow a gasket out here, you're looking at thousands in damage instead of a $50 repair." Ethan wanted to tell her to leave, wanted to maintain the distance he'd created. But something in her voice, the complete lack of condescension, the genuine concern, made him pause. "I don't need, white hands don't touch your car." The words came out before he could stop them, cold and cutting. "I get it." Claire stopped walking. The hurt that flashed across her face was brief but unmistakable. She took a step back, her hands falling to her sides. "That's not what I meant," Ethan said quickly, but the words hung in the air between them like a wall. "Isn't it?" Claire's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. Because it sure sounded like it. Ethan's throat felt tight. He wanted to explain, to take back the words that had come from some dark place inside him, a place where old wounds lived alongside newer fears. But how could he explain that it wasn't about her race, that it was about trust, about control, about the way people looked at his money and saw opportunity instead of a person? He stopped, ran a hand over his face. "I handle my own problems." "I can see that," Claire said. "And how's that working out for you?" The question hit harder than it should have. Ethan looked at his disabled car, at the empty road stretching in both directions, at his phone with no signal bars. Then he looked at Claire, who stood beside her truck with her arms crossed, waiting. She should have been angry, should have driven away and left him to figure it out himself. But she was still here, still offering help he didn't deserve. "The radiator hose," she said, her voice softer now. "That's where your leak is coming from. See how the coolant's pooling right there under the front end?" Ethan followed her gaze. She was right. There was a small puddle of green liquid forming on the asphalt. "The hose probably just needs to be tightened or replaced. It's an easy fix if you've got the right tools." She paused. "Which I do." "You don't have to." "No, I don't." Claire opened the toolbox in her truck bed. "But here's the thing about being stranded on a quiet road. It sucks. And I don't like watching people suffer when I can help." She pulled out a small toolkit and a flashlight. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to look at your engine. I'm going to fix what's broken. And you're going to say, 'Thank you,' and drive home safely." Ethan watched her approach his car again, this time with tools in hand. Everything in him wanted to stop her, to maintain control of the situation. But another part of him, a quieter part, was tired of fighting. "Why?" he asked. Claire looked up from where she was examining the engine. "Why what?" "Why help someone who was rude to you?" She was quiet for a moment, her hands stilled on the radiator hose. "Because everyone has bad days," she said finally. "And because the right thing to do doesn't change just because someone's having one." The words hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had shown him kindness without wanting something in return? When was the last time someone had looked past his defensive walls and seen something worth helping? Claire worked in silence, her movements sure and efficient. She loosened the clamp on the radiator hose, examined it in the light, then reached for a replacement from her toolkit. "You keep spare hoses in your truck?" Ethan asked. "Common failure point," she said without looking up, "especially on luxury cars that don't get regular maintenance." There was no accusation in her voice, but Ethan felt the sting anyway. "I have it serviced." "When's the last time?" He couldn't remember. The cars in his collection got obsessive care. But this daily driver, he just expected it to work. 6 months ago, maybe. Claire made a small sound that might have been amusement. "These engines like attention, every 3 months minimum." She finished installing the new hose and refilled the coolant reservoir from a jug she'd retrieved from her truck. Her hands were steady, competent. There was something calming about watching her work, something that eased the tight feeling in Ethan's chest. "There," she said, closing the hood. "Try starting it now." Ethan got behind the wheel and turned the key. The engine caught immediately, purring with smooth confidence. He checked the temperature gauge. Normal. He got out to find Claire washing her hands with a bottle of water from her truck. The stains on her shirt had grown, and there was a smudge of grease on her cheek, but she looked satisfied. "How much do I owe you?" Ethan reached for his wallet. Claire shook her head. "Nothing." "That's not... I have to pay you something." "No, you don't." She dried her hands on a shop rag. "But maybe next time someone offers to help, you don't assume the worst about their intentions." The words were gentle, but they cut deep. Ethan stood beside his running car, watching this woman who had every right to drive away and leave him stranded. Instead, she'd fixed his problem and asked for nothing in return. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "About what I said, about how I acted." Claire studied his face for a long moment. "We all carry stuff that makes us defensive. The trick is not letting it make us cruel." She walked toward her truck, then paused with her hand on the door handle. "Drive careful, and get this car looked at properly. Soon." "Wait." The word escaped before Ethan could stop it. "What's your name?" "Claire Whitman." "I'm Ethan Brooks." She nodded once, a small acknowledgement, then climbed into her truck. Ethan watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing around a curve in the road. He stood there for several minutes, listening to his engine run smoothly, thinking about the woman who had seen past his rudeness to the person underneath, thinking about the grace she'd shown, the skill she'd demonstrated, the quiet strength in her voice when she'd called him out. When he finally got back in his car and drove toward town, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Claire Whitman, about the way she'd stayed calm when he'd been defensive, about the kindness she'd shown someone who didn't deserve it, about the fact that, for the first time in years, someone had helped him without wanting anything in return. The feeling was unsettling and warm at the same time, like stepping into sunlight after too long in the cold. As he drove through the gathering dusk, Ethan found himself hoping their paths would cross again. He had a feeling he owed Claire Whitman more than just a thank you. That evening, Ethan sat in his home office, staring out at the ocean view that had cost him $2 million. The house was quiet. It was always quiet. Marble floors, high ceilings, expensive furniture that looked perfect and felt cold. He kept thinking about Claire's hands as she'd worked on his engine. Confident, capable, unafraid. When was the last time he'd felt unafraid? The question bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He'd built his life around control, around making sure he never had to depend on anyone else's kindness or generosity. He'd learned early that people saw his success and made assumptions about what he owed them, what they deserved from him, what his money could buy. But Claire hadn't asked for money, hadn't asked for anything at all. The memory of his own words made him wince. "White hands don't touch my car." What kind of person said something like that to someone trying to help? The kind of person who'd been hurt before, a quiet voice in his head replied. The kind of person who'd learned to put walls up before anyone could get close enough to disappoint him. But Claire hadn't tried to get close. She'd just tried to help. Ethan picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found his sister's number. "Calling me twice in 1 month." Diana's voice was warm with amusement. "Should I be worried?" "Funny." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I need to ask you something." "Shoot." "If someone helped you, really helped you, and you were rude to them, how would you make it right?" There was a pause. "This is about a woman, isn't it?" "Diana." "It's about a woman. I can tell by the tone of your voice." His sister's delight was obvious. "What did you do, Ethan?" He told her about the breakdown, about Claire's offer of help, about his defensive reaction. Diana listened without interrupting, but he could practically hear her cringing. "Oh, Ethan," she said when he finished. "You said that? To someone trying to help you?" "I know how it sounds." "Do you?" "Because it sounds like you were cruel to someone who didn't deserve it, someone who went out of her way to help a stranger." The words stung because they were true. "I want to apologize properly, but I don't know how." "Start by admitting you were wrong, not defensive wrong, not justified wrong, actually wrong." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What if she doesn't want to hear it?" "Then that's her right," Diana said gently. "But Ethan, the fact that you're asking this question tells me you've met someone worth knowing. Don't let your pride cost you that." After they hung up, Ethan sat in his quiet house and thought about Claire's voice when she'd said, "Everyone has bad days," about the way she'd stayed to help even after he'd been rude, about the competence in her hands and the kindness in her eyes. He thought about the loneliness that had become so familiar he'd stopped noticing it. Maybe it was time to notice. The next morning, Ethan drove through town until he found Tom's garage. It was a modest building with 2 service bays in a small parking lot filled with cars in various states of repair. A hand-painted sign hung over the entrance, weathered but welcoming. Through the open bay door, he could see someone working under the hood of an old sedan. The person straightened as he approached, wiping hands on a rag. It was Claire. She looked surprised to see him, her expression guarded but polite. "Mr. Brooks, is your car giving you trouble again?" "No, the car's fine." Ethan felt suddenly uncertain. In his office, in his showrooms, he always knew what to say. Here, watching Claire watch him with careful eyes, he felt like a teenager asking someone to prom. "I wanted to talk to you." "Okay." She glanced toward the office where an older man was visible through the glass door. "Tom's inside if you need—" "I wanted to talk to you," Ethan repeated, "about yesterday." Claire's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. She set down her tools and faced him fully. "I was wrong," he said simply. "The way I acted, the things I said. You were trying to help, and I was awful to you." "Yes," Claire said quietly. "You were." The direct honesty of her response was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. Ethan had expected her to minimize it, to make excuses for him the way people usually did when he showed them pieces of his wealth. "I don't have a good reason," he continued. "I was having a bad day, I was frustrated, and I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it, someone who was being kind to a stranger." Claire studied his face. And I'm sorry. Really sorry." She was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the sounds of the garage continued, the hiss of an air compressor, the clink of tools, the distant sound of traffic on the main road. "Apology accepted," she said finally. Relief flooded through him, stronger than he'd expected. "Thank you." "But," Claire continued, her voice gentle but firm, "sorry doesn't erase the hurt. And it doesn't mean I'm going to pretend it didn't happen." Ethan nodded. "I understand. Do you?" She tilted her head slightly. "Because what you said yesterday, that wasn't just rudeness. That was something deeper, something that made you see me as a threat instead of someone trying to help." The observation was so accurate it made his chest tight. How could she read him so clearly when they'd known each other for less than 24 hours? "I don't trust easily," he said. "Neither do I." Claire picked up a wrench, turning it over in her hands. "But I don't let that make me cruel to people who don't deserve it." The words hit home like they were supposed to. Ethan stood in the garage, surrounded by the honest smell of motor oil and the sounds of real work being done, and felt something crack open inside his chest. "You're right," he said, "and I don't know how to do better." For the first time since he'd arrived, Claire's expression softened slightly. "Honesty's a good start." "Then honestly, I'm not good at needing help. I'm not good at trusting people, and when someone offers kindness without wanting something in return, I don't know how to handle it." Claire set down the wrench. "Why do you think I wanted something?" The question caught him off guard. Everyone wants something. That's a sad way to live. It was. Ethan realized that as soon as she said it. When had he become so cynical? When had he started assuming the worst about everyone? "Maybe," he said, "but it's safer." "Safer than what?" "Than being disappointed." Claire was quiet for a moment, her gaze steady on his face. "Have you ever thought that by protecting yourself from disappointment, you might be protecting yourself from everything else too?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Ethan didn't have an answer, or maybe he did and wasn't ready to voice it. "I should let you get back to work," he said. "Probably." But Claire didn't move. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Yesterday, when you realized I knew what I was talking about, when I diagnosed your problem without even touching your car, you looked surprised. Why?" Ethan thought about lying, about giving her some safe, surface answer, but she'd asked for honesty, and something about the quiet way she waited for his response made him want to give it to her. "Because most people who offer to help don't actually know how," he said. "They just want to be involved, want to be part of the solution so they can take credit for it later." And you thought that's what I was doing? Yes. The admission felt like pulling a thorn from a wound. I thought you saw the expensive car and the expensive clothes and figured you could get something out of me. Claire nodded slowly. And when I actually fixed your car without asking for anything, it messed up your assumptions. Completely. Good, she said, and there was a hint of a smile in her voice. Maybe that means you'll think twice before making them again. Despite everything, the awkwardness of the conversation, the shame of his own behavior, Ethan found himself almost smiling too. Maybe? I should get back to work, Claire said, but she didn't sound like she was trying to get rid of him. Right, Ethan hesitated. Claire? Yeah? Thank you. For yesterday and for today, for listening. You're welcome. He turned to leave, then stopped. If I wanted to have your expertise look at another car, professionally, with payment and everything done properly, would you consider it? Claire's eyebrows rose. What kind of car? A 1967 Mustang Fastback. It's been sitting in my garage for 2 years because I can't find anyone I trust to work on it. What's wrong with it? I don't know. That's the problem. For the first time since he'd known her, Claire looked genuinely interested. Original engine? As far as I know. Restoration or repair? Whatever it needs. She was quiet for a moment, and Ethan could almost see her thinking it through. I'd have to look at it first, give you an honest assessment. Of course. And if I say it's more than I can handle, you accept that without argument. Agreed. Claire wiped her hands on her rag again, a gesture that Ethan was beginning to recognize as her thinking pose. When? Whenever works for you. Tomorrow afternoon, say 2 o'clock? Perfect. Ethan pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it to her. My address is on there. Claire looked at the card and her expression shifted slightly. Brooks Luxury Motors. You own the dealership on Ocean Avenue. 3 of them, actually. She looked up at him, something new in her expression. You're that Brooks. Does that change anything? Claire was quiet for a long moment. I don't know yet. The honesty of her response was somehow more reassuring than a quick no would have been. At least she was still thinking, still willing to give him a chance. 2 o'clock tomorrow, she said. I'll be there. As Ethan drove away from the garage, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Not the calculated excitement of a business deal or the satisfaction of acquiring something expensive. Just simple human anticipation of seeing someone again, someone who had called him out when he was wrong and forgiven him when he apologized, someone who looked at his wealth and saw complication instead of opportunity, someone who might, maybe, be worth the risk of trusting. For the first time in a long time, tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. The next afternoon, Ethan found himself checking the time every few minutes. At exactly 2 o'clock, he heard the rumble of Claire's pickup truck in his driveway. His house sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows. The garage was separate from the main house, a climate-controlled space that housed his collection. As Claire's truck came to a stop, Ethan walked out to meet her. She stepped out wearing clean jeans and a different t-shirt, this one navy blue with no garage logo. Her hair was down today, falling just past her shoulders, and she carried a small toolbox. Nice place, she said, looking up at the house. Thanks. Ethan felt suddenly self-conscious about the obvious wealth on display. The garage is this way. He led her to the separate building and pressed a button on his key fob. The door rolled up smoothly, revealing his collection. Claire stopped walking. Inside the garage sat 6 cars, each one perfectly positioned and spotlessly maintained. A 1963 Corvette split window, a 1970 Plymouth Cuda, a 1969 Camaro SS, a Ferrari 458, a Lamborghini Huracan, and in the back corner, covered by a tarp, the Mustang. Holy cow, Claire breathed. Ethan watched her face, expecting to see calculation there, or greed. Instead, he saw pure appreciation. She walked slowly between the cars, her eyes taking in every detail. These are beautiful, she said softly. Do you drive them? Sometimes. The classics get taken out on weekends when the weather's perfect. The newer ones more often. Claire nodded, running her fingers lightly along the Corvette's fender. They're meant to be driven. Cars aren't art. They're poetry in motion. Something in her voice made Ethan's chest warm. That's exactly how I feel about them. Most collectors don't. They treat cars like museum pieces. She looked at him with something that might have been respect. You actually love them. Since I was a kid. The admission came easier than he'd expected. My dad worked construction, and every Saturday we'd go to car shows. He'd tell me about the engines, the history, the craftsmanship. I promised myself that someday I'd own cars like these. And now you do. Yeah, Ethan pulled the tarp off the Mustang. But this one's been nothing but trouble. Claire approached the car slowly, her expression shifting into professional mode. The Mustang was Highland green, the same color as the one from the movie Bullitt. Even sitting still, it looked fast. What year did you say? 67? 67 Fastback 390 V8. Ethan opened the hood. I bought it at an estate sale 2 years ago. The owner said it ran when he parked it, but that was 15 years ago. Claire leaned over the engine bay, her trained eye taking in every component. She didn't touch anything yet, just looked. Original drivetrain? As far as I know. Carb rebuilt? No idea. Fuel system flushed? Probably not. Claire straightened and looked at him with a slight smile. So you bought a car that's been sitting for 15 years and you're surprised it doesn't run. When you put it that way, it sounds pretty stupid. Not stupid. Hopeful. She opened the driver's door and peered inside. Interior's in good shape. Seats reupholstered. Original vinyl, but restored. Nice. She popped the hood release and went back to studying the engine. This time she began touching components, checking belts, looking at hoses, examining connections. Ethan watched her work, noting the careful way she handled each part, the methodical approach to her inspection. There was something mesmerizing about watching someone who truly knew what they were doing. Okay, Claire said after 20 minutes. Want the good news or the bad news first? Bad news. This car needs everything. Fuel system flush, carburetor rebuild, new belts and hoses, brake system overhaul, cooling system service, probably new tires, definitely a tune-up. She wiped her hands on a rag. And that's just to get it running safely. Ethan's heart sank. And the good news? It's all doable. The engine's solid, the body's straight, and whoever restored the interior did beautiful work. This isn't a parts car, it's a classic waiting to wake up. How long would something like that take? Done right? 2 months, maybe 3. Depends on parts availability and what surprises we find along the way. We? Claire paused, her rag stilled in her hands. If you want me to work on it, I can give you a written estimate, references from other restoration jobs. You don't have to decide right now. But Ethan had already decided. Watching her examine his car, seeing the care she took with every component, hearing the genuine enthusiasm in her voice when she talked about bringing it back to life, he knew he wanted Claire Whitman working on his Mustang. What would you charge? $40 an hour for labor, plus parts at cost. I don't mark up parts. I figure my expertise is what you're paying for, not my ability to add 20% to a bill. The honesty of that approach surprised him. Most of the mechanics he'd dealt with made their real money on marked-up parts. That seems fair. There's one condition. Ethan tensed slightly. Here it comes, he thought. The catch. I work on it at Tom's garage. I've got all my tools there, the lift, the parts connections. I don't do house calls for jobs this big. Relief flooded through him. That's fine. And if you want to check on progress, you call first. I don't like people hovering while I work. Also fine, Claire studied his face. You're agreeing pretty quickly for someone who doesn't trust easily. The observation caught him off guard. I trust your expertise. That's not the same as trusting me. She was right, and they both knew it. Ethan looked at the Mustang, then at Claire, trying to figure out what he was really agreeing to. No, he said finally. It's not, but it's a start. Something in Claire's expression shifted, not warmer exactly, but less guarded. Yeah, it is. They spent the next hour going over details. Claire made notes about the work needed, estimated costs for parts, explained her timeline. She was professional and thorough, answering his questions without making him feel stupid for asking them. One more thing, she said as they finished up. This is a business arrangement. I work on your car, you pay me, we're both happy. But what happened yesterday, that doesn't disappear just because we're doing business now. I wouldn't expect it to. Good. Claire closed her notebook. Because I'm willing to give you a chance to show me that yesterday was an exception, not the rule. But if you treat me or anyone else at the garage the way you treated me on that road, this arrangement ends. Clear? The boundary was firm but fair. Ethan found himself respecting her even more for setting it. Clear. All right then, Claire extended her hand. We have a deal. Ethan shook her hand, noting the calluses from years of working with tools, the strength in her grip. We have a deal. After Claire left, Ethan stood in his garage looking at the Mustang. For 2 years, it had been a reminder of his own limitations, a beautiful machine he couldn't fix, couldn't bring to life. Now it felt like something else, a possibility. His phone buzzed with a text from his best friend Marcus. Dinner tonight? You've been hermit mode lately. Ethan typed back, Can't, business meeting. The response came quickly. Since when do your business meetings make you smile? Ethan looked at his reflection in the Corvette's polished surface. He was smiling. When had that started? It's complicated, he texted back. The best things usually are. Call me later. As the afternoon faded into evening, Ethan found himself thinking about Claire's hands as she'd examined his car. The careful way she'd touched each component, the respect she'd shown for the machine, the way she'd called it a classic waiting to wake up. When was the last time someone had looked at something broken in his life and seen potential instead of problems? The next morning, Claire called to let him know she'd ordered the parts and would start work the following Monday. Her voice was professional but friendly, the careful distance of someone who was willing to work with him but wasn't ready to trust him. I'll have the car towed to the garage Monday morning, she said. Should take about a week for all the parts to come in. Sounds good. There was a pause. Ethan? The use of his first name surprised him. Yeah? This car. It's going to be beautiful when it's finished, but it's going to take time and patience and trust in the process. Are you okay with that? He understood she wasn't just talking about the car. I'm learning to be. That's all anyone can ask for. After they hung up, Ethan sat in his office looking out at the ocean. For the first time in months, he had something to look forward to that didn't involve closing a deal or making money. He had a car being restored by someone who understood both its potential and its problems. And maybe, just maybe, he had a chance to restore something in himself too. The thought should have scared him. Instead, it filled him with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical coastal weather for late October. Ethan watched from his office as the tow truck loaded his Mustang, feeling oddly protective of the car as it disappeared down his driveway. By Wednesday, he was fighting the urge to call Claire and check on progress. By Friday, he'd lost the battle. It's been 4 days, he said when she answered the phone. Hello to you too, Claire's voice carried a hint of amusement. And yes, it's been 4 days. The parts I ordered are starting to arrive. How's it looking? Like a car that's been sitting for 15 years. There was a pause, and he could hear the sound of air tools in the background. Ethan, I told you I'd call with updates. This process takes time. I know. He stopped, not sure how to explain the restless energy that had been building all week. You just what? I keep thinking about it, wondering how it's going. Claire was quiet for a moment. Have you ever restored a car before? No. Then let me explain something. Restoration isn't like buying a car off a lot. It's not fast, it's not predictable, and it definitely isn't smooth. Some days I make huge progress. Some days I spend 4 hours trying to remove one rusted bolt. That sounds frustrating. It can be. But here's the thing. When that bolt finally comes free, when an engine that's been silent for years suddenly purrs to life, when you take a car from broken to beautiful, it's magic. The passion in her voice made Ethan's chest warm. You really love this work. I do, but I only love it when I'm allowed to do it right. And doing it right means taking the time it takes. Message received. I'll stop calling every day. You can call, Claire said, her tone softer. Just don't expect me to have dramatic progress reports. Most of restoration is slow, careful work. What are you working on right now? Rebuilding the carburetor. Want to know what that involves? Yes. For the next 10 minutes, Claire walked him through the process of disassembling and cleaning the carburetor, explaining each step in simple terms. Ethan found himself genuinely interested, not just in the work, but in the way she talked about it, with respect for the complexity and satisfaction in the craft. "You're good at explaining things," he said when she finished. "I have to be. Most of my customers don't know a carburetor from an air filter." "But you don't talk down to them." "Why would I? Ignorance isn't stupidity. Everyone's an expert at something. Cars just happen to be my thing." The simple wisdom of that statement stayed with Ethan long after they hung up. Everyone's an expert at something. When was the last time he'd approached someone else's expertise with that kind of respect? Saturday afternoon, Ethan found himself driving past Tom's garage. He told himself he wasn't checking up on Claire. He was just running errands in the area. But when he saw his Mustang visible through the open bay door, he pulled into the parking lot. Claire was bent over the engine, her hair pulled back and her hands covered in grease. She looked up as he approached, raising one eyebrow. "Let me guess, you were just in the neighborhood." "Actually, yes." Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious about the progress. Claire straightened, wiping her hands on a rag. The Mustang's engine bay looked completely different, cleaner, more organized. Several components had been removed and others looked newly installed. "Want the tour?" "Please." Claire walked him through what she'd accomplished. Fuel lines flushed and replaced, carburetor rebuilt and reinstalled, belts and hoses replaced, cooling system serviced. Her explanations were clear and thorough, delivered without condescension. "When do you think it'll be ready for a test drive?" "Another week, maybe 2. I still need to go through the brake system and electrical." Claire closed the hood. "But Ethan, I have to ask, what's this really about?" "What do you mean?" "You own 3 car dealerships. You've got mechanics on staff who could have done this work. So why bring it to a small-town garage?" The question he'd been avoiding thinking about. Ethan looked at the Mustang, then at Claire, trying to find an honest answer. "Because they work for me," he said finally. "When you work for someone, you tell them what they want to hear. You don't challenge their assumptions or call them on their mistakes." "And you think I will?" "I know you will. You already have." Claire studied his face. "Is that what you want? Someone who will be honest with you?" "I think so. I'm not used to it, but yeah, I think that's what I want." Something in Claire's expression shifted. Not softer exactly, but more open. "Honest goes both ways, you know." "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you want me to be straight with you about your car, about my work, about anything else that comes up, then you need to be straight with me too." The challenge was clear. Ethan felt the familiar urge to put up walls, to retreat into the safe distance of employer and employee. But looking at Claire, seeing the careful hope in her eyes, he found he didn't want distance. "Okay," he said, "honesty, both ways." "Good." Claire smiled then, the first truly warm smile he'd seen from her. "In that case, honestly. This car is going to be incredible when it's finished. You made a good choice buying it." "Even though I let it sit for 2 years?" "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do next." The words hit deeper than they were probably meant to. Ethan stood in the garage surrounded by the honest smell of motor oil and the sounds of real work, and felt something settle into place inside his chest. "Claire?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for giving me a chance to do better. Thank you for taking it." As Ethan drove home that evening, he realized something had changed. The restless energy that had been building all week was gone, replaced by something steadier. Anticipation, yes, but patient anticipation. For the first time in years, he was learning to trust the process, and maybe, just maybe, learning to trust the person guiding it. 2 weeks later, Ethan's phone rang at 7:30 in the morning. "It's ready!" Claire's voice was bright with excitement. "Your Mustang is ready for its first test drive." Ethan was out of bed and dressed within 10 minutes. He'd been dreaming about this moment for weeks, imagining the sound of the engine coming to life, the feeling of driving a car he'd helped bring back from the dead. When he arrived at the garage, he found Claire waiting beside the Mustang. The car looked transformed. The Highland green paint gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the chrome bumpers reflected like mirrors, and through the windshield he could see the restored interior in all its glory. "She's beautiful," he breathed. "She's more than that." Claire patted the hood affectionately. "She's alive again." Tom emerged from the office, coffee cup in hand and a grin on his weathered face. "Haven't seen Claire this excited about a finished job in months." "It's a special car," Claire said, but her eyes were on Ethan's face, watching his reaction. "Want to do the honors?" She held out the keys. Ethan took them, the metal warm from her hand. He slid behind the wheel, adjusting the seat, familiarizing himself with the controls. Everything felt solid, purposeful. "Turn her over," Claire said from beside the car. Ethan turned the key. The engine caught immediately, settling into a deep, steady rumble that vibrated through the steering wheel and into his bones. The sound was perfect, powerful but controlled, mechanical music that spoke of precision and care. "How does she feel?" Claire asked, like she's been waiting for this moment. Ethan revved the engine gently, listening to the clean response. "Want to come for a test drive?" Claire hesitated. "I should stay here. Make sure Tom doesn't need—" "Go on," Tom called from the office doorway. "I can handle things for an hour." "Come on," Ethan said. "You brought her back to life. You should feel what that means." Claire looked at the car, then at Ethan, then back at the car. "Okay, but I'm driving first." They switched places, and Claire adjusted the mirrors and seat with practiced efficiency. She backed the Mustang out of the garage slowly, testing the brakes, getting a feel for the steering. "Everything feels good," she murmured, more to herself than to Ethan. "Brakes are solid, steering's responsive." She pulled onto the main road and gradually increased speed. The Mustang responded eagerly, the rebuilt 390 V8 providing smooth, effortless power. "Listen to that engine," Claire said, downshifting as they approached a hill. "Purring like a kitten. A very large, very dangerous kitten." Claire laughed, the sound bright and spontaneous. "That's exactly what muscle cars are. Beautiful predators in civilized clothing." They drove for 20 minutes, taking back roads that wound along the coast. Claire tested every system, brakes, steering, acceleration, the rebuilt transmission. Everything worked perfectly. "Your turn," she said, pulling into an empty parking lot overlooking the ocean. They switched seats again, and Ethan felt the full power of the restored car for the first time. The acceleration was smooth but forceful, the steering precise, the brakes confident. It felt like driving a completely different machine than the broken car he'd bought 2 years ago. "This is incredible," he said, taking a curve with easy grace. "I can't believe this is the same car." "It's not really." Claire rolled down her window, letting the ocean breeze flow through the car. "It's better than it was originally. Modern parts where they improve things, original parts where they matter, best of both worlds." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the Mustang eating up miles with effortless power. Ethan found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did, the tension he carried in his shoulders melting away with each mile. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said as they headed back toward town. "Sure." "Why this car? I mean, you've got amazing cars in your collection. What made you want to restore a broken Mustang?" Ethan considered the question. "Honestly, I think I identified with it." "How so?" "Something beautiful that wasn't working. Something with potential that was being wasted." He paused. "Something that needed someone who knew what they were doing to bring it back to life." Claire was quiet for a moment. "That's either very profound or you're overthinking car ownership." "Probably both," she laughed again, and the sound made Ethan's chest warm. When was the last time he'd made someone laugh? When was the last time he'd wanted to? "For what it's worth," Claire said, "I think the Mustang was lucky to find you." "Even though I let it sit for 2 years?" "Oh, even though. Sometimes things have to wait for the right person to come along, someone who'll do right by them." There was something in her tone that made Ethan think she wasn't just talking about the car. He glanced at her profile as she watched the road, noting the way the ocean breeze had loosened strands of her hair, the contentment in her expression. "Claire?" "Hmm?" "Thank you, not just for the work, for everything, for being patient with me, for pushing back when I needed it, for giving me a second chance." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Everyone deserves a second chance." The question is what you do with it. They were back at the garage now, the test drive complete. Ethan parked the Mustang and turned off the engine, immediately missing the sound. "So what's the verdict?" Claire asked. "Perfect. Absolutely perfect." "Good." She opened her door, then paused. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you." His chest tightened slightly. "Okay. I enjoyed today. The drive, the conversation, spending time with you. And that complicates things." "How?" Claire got out of the car and leaned against the door. "Because we started this as a business arrangement. You're my customer. But customers don't usually make me laugh, and I don't usually look forward to seeing them." Ethan felt his heart speed up. "And that's a problem?" "It could be, if we're not careful about boundaries, if we let personal feelings interfere with professional judgment." She was right, and Ethan knew it. But looking at her now, hair mussed from the wind, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, grease still under her fingernails from working on his car, he found he didn't care about boundaries. "What if we didn't want to be careful?" he asked. Claire's smile faded. "Then one of us would probably get hurt." "Maybe. Or maybe we'd both get something good." "Ethan," there was warning in her voice, but also something else. Hope, maybe, or possibility. "I know it's complicated," he said. "I know there are good reasons to keep things professional, but Claire, I haven't felt this awake in years, and I think maybe you feel it too." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. "I do feel it," she said finally. "But feeling something and acting on it are different things." "What would it take? To act on it, I mean." "Honesty, complete honesty, about what we want, what we're afraid of, what we're willing to risk." Claire straightened, her expression serious. "And time. We'd need to take time to figure out if this is real or just chemistry." "I can do honesty," Ethan said, "and I've got all the time in the world. Do you? Because honestly, Ethan, I don't know if you're ready for someone who's going to challenge you, who's going to call you on your stuff, who won't just agree with you because you're successful." The words should have stung. Instead, they made him smile. "That's exactly what I want. Even when it's hard, even when it means admitting you're wrong, especially then." Claire studied his face for another long moment. "Okay," she said finally. "But we go slow. We figure out if we actually like each other or if we just like the idea of each other." "How do we do that?" "We spend time together. Real time, not just car-related time. We talk about things that matter. We see how we handle disagreements." She paused. "And we don't sleep together until we know this is something worth risking." The directness of her words surprised him, but he appreciated the clarity. "Fair enough. I mean it, Ethan. I'm not interested in being someone's rebound or experiment or midlife crisis. If we do this, it's because we think it might actually go somewhere. I want it to go somewhere. You think you do, but you've been alone a long time, and I've been rebuilding my confidence after someone broke it. We both need to be sure." There was pain in her voice when she mentioned the past, and Ethan felt a surge of protective anger toward whoever had hurt her. But this wasn't the time to ask about that. "So what happens now?" Claire looked at the Mustang, then back at Ethan. "Now you pay me for the restoration. We settle the business side of things. And then?" "And then, if you want to, you ask me out to dinner. Somewhere we can talk without the distraction of engines and tools." Ethan felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been wound tight for years. "Claire Whitman, would you have dinner with me tomorrow night?" "I'd like that." "Good." He paused. "Should I pick you up, or is that moving too fast?" "You can pick me up." "But Ethan." "Yeah? This is me giving us a chance. Don't make me regret it." The words were a challenge, and a promise rolled into one. Ethan looked at this woman who had fixed his car and was offering to take a chance on fixing whatever was broken in him, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine hope for the future. "I won't," he said. "I promise." As he drove the Mustang home that evening, listening to the perfect purr of the restored engine, Ethan thought about Claire's hands bringing the car back to life, about her patience with his questions and her refusal to accept his worst behavior, about the way she'd looked at him when she'd said she enjoyed spending time with him. The Mustang responded to every input with precision and power, a machine made whole again by someone who understood both its potential and its problems. Maybe, Ethan thought, the same thing could happen to him. The next evening, Ethan stood in front of his closet trying to decide what to wear to dinner. Everything looked either too formal or too casual, too much like he was trying to impress someone or not trying hard enough. Finally, he settled on dark jeans and a button-down shirt, nice enough to show respect, casual enough to show he wasn't trying to overwhelm her with wealth. Claire's address led him to a modest neighborhood about 10 minutes from the garage. Her house was a small craftsman bungalow with a neat yard and flower boxes under the windows. A far cry from his oceanfront mansion, but it felt warm and welcoming in a way his place never had. She answered the door, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes and her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful, but more than that, she looked comfortable in her own skin in a way that made Ethan suddenly nervous about his own appearance. "You clean up nice," she said with a smile. "So do you. You look—" He stopped, searching for the right word. "You look perfect." Smooth talker, but she was still smiling. "Ready to go?" They drove to a small Italian restaurant Claire had suggested, the kind of place with red checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. Not the sort of place Ethan usually went, but exactly the kind of atmosphere he realized he'd been missing. "This is nice," he said as they were seated at a corner table. "The food's amazing, and it's quiet enough to actually talk." Claire opened her menu. "Plus, Maria, the owner, is a friend of mine. She'll take good care of us." "How long have you lived here?" "About 3 years. I grew up in Sacramento, moved here after—" She paused, her expression shadowing slightly. "After my life there fell apart." "What happened?" Claire was quiet for a moment, clearly debating how much to share. "I was engaged to a man who turned out to be very different from who I thought he was." "Different how?" "Controlling, manipulative, very good at making me think I was crazy when I questioned him." She met Ethan's eyes. "He convinced me I wasn't good enough at anything. Not good enough at my job, not good enough as a partner, not good enough to trust my own judgment." Anger flared in Ethan's chest. He was wrong. I know that now, but it took me a long time to believe it again. Claire folded her napkin carefully. "I moved here to start over. Took the job with Tom because he was willing to give me a chance when other people saw a woman and assumed I couldn't handle the work. And now I know what I'm worth, what I'm capable of. And I don't settle for people who try to make me smaller." She looked at him directly. "Which is why I need you to understand something." "Okay. I won't be another project for you to fix or control. I'm not broken, even if I have some scars, and I won't pretend to be less than I am to make anyone more comfortable." The strength in her voice, the clear boundary she was setting, made Ethan respect her even more. "I don't want to fix you or control you. I want to know you." "Good. Because I'm not easy to know. I have opinions, I speak my mind, and I don't back down when I think I'm right." "I've noticed," Claire smiled. "And you? What's your damage?" The blunt question caught him off guard. "My damage? Everyone has something. You're 42, successful, attractive, and single. What's your story?" "I'm 32. "That doesn't answer the question." Ethan took a sip of wine, buying time to think. How much honesty was too much for a first date? "I don't trust people's motives," he said finally. "I've learned that most people see my money before they see me, and the ones who do see me, I have a habit of pushing them away before they can leave." "Why do you assume they'll leave?" "Because they always do. Once they realize I'm not as easygoing as I seem. Once they figure out I've got walls built around more walls." "And you think that's unfixable?" "I don't know. I've never tried to fix it before." Claire leaned back in her chair, studying his face. "What's different now?" Ethan thought about the question, really thought about it. "You," he said finally. "You've seen me at my worst and you're still here. You've called me on my problems and somehow made me want to do better instead of making me want to run away. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone. Is it too much?" Claire was quiet for a moment. "Ask me again in a few months." They talked through dinner about lighter things, her work, his business, books they'd read, places they'd traveled. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by Claire's laughter and Ethan's growing realization that he could talk to this woman for hours without getting bored. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said as they shared dessert. "Sure." "That first day on the road, what were you really afraid of?" The question hit deeper than he'd expected. "Honestly, that you'd see through me. See that despite all the expensive stuff, I'm just someone who doesn't really know how to connect with people anymore. And now I'm terrified that you'll figure out I'm falling for you and decide I'm not worth the trouble." The words were out before he could stop them, more honest than he'd intended to be. Claire's expression grew serious. "Ethan, too much too soon?" "Maybe, but I appreciate the honesty." She set down her fork. "Can I be honest too? Please. I'm scared too. Scared that I'll let myself care about you and then find out you're just another man who thinks he knows what's best for me. Scared that I'm reading this whole thing wrong and you're just being polite." "You're not reading it wrong." "Then what are we doing?" Ethan reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "We're taking a chance. We're being brave enough to try something that might not work out." Claire looked down at their joined hands. "This is crazy. We barely know each other. Sometimes the heart knows things before the head does. That's exactly the kind of thinking that got me in trouble before. I'm not him, Claire. I won't try to control you or make you doubt yourself." "Promise?" "I promise." She was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing across his knuckles. "Okay," she said finally. "We try, but slowly and honestly. And if either of us starts to feel like this isn't working, we say so. Deal." As they left the restaurant, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. The evening air was soft with the promise of spring, and Claire's hand was warm in his. "Thank you," he said as they reached his car. "For what?" "For taking a chance on me, for seeing something worth salvaging." Claire smiled up at him. "Thank you for being worth it." When he dropped her off at her house, Claire paused with her hand on the car door. "Ethan, yeah? This was nice. Really nice." "I thought so too." "Good." She leaned over and kissed his cheek, brief and soft. "Call me." As Ethan drove home, he found himself smiling for no particular reason. The Mustang purred beneath him, restored and whole, and for the first time in years, he felt like maybe he could be restored too. Maybe, with the right person helping, even the most damaged things could run like new again. 3 months later, Ethan found himself looking forward to Saturdays in a way he never had before. Not because he didn't have to work, he'd always worked weekends anyway, but because Saturdays meant spending the day with Claire. Today they were working on her own project car, a 1969 Camaro SS that she'd bought as a rust bucket and was slowly bringing back to life. Unlike his Mustang restoration, this was a long-term labor of love, something she worked on in her spare time with no deadline and no pressure. "Hand me that socket wrench," Claire said from underneath the car. They were in her garage behind the house, a space barely big enough for one car but packed with the tools and parts of someone who truly understood machines. Ethan passed her the tool and went back to sanding the passenger door. It was meditative work, the kind of repetitive task that let his mind wander while his hands stayed busy. "So Marcus thinks I should ask you to move in with me," he said. There was a clang from under the car, followed by some creative cursing. "Did you just make me hit my head on the oil pan on purpose?" "Sorry, bad timing." Claire slid out from under the Camaro, grease streaked across her cheek and an unreadable expression on her face. "What did you tell Marcus?" "That it wasn't his decision to make." "Good answer." She wiped her hands on a rag. "But what do you think?" Ethan set down his sandpaper and really looked at her. 3 months of dating had taught him to read the subtle signs of Claire's moods, the way she pressed her lips together when she was thinking hard, the slight tension in her shoulders when she was uncertain. "I think I love spending time with you," he said carefully. "I think I love the way you challenge me and support me and call me on my stuff when I need it. But I also think we both have good reasons to be careful, to make sure we're making decisions based on what's right for us, not just what feels good in the moment." Claire nodded slowly. "That's very mature of you. Is that a compliment or an insult?" "It's an observation." She sat on an overturned crate that served as her garage chair. "For the record, I love spending time with you too. These past 3 months have been Good. Really good. I hear another but coming. But moving in together is a big step. It changes everything. The dynamic, the expectations, the ability to walk away if things don't work out. The phrase walk away hit Ethan harder than it should have. Are you thinking about walking away? No, Claire's answer was immediate and firm. But I need to know that you're not either. That if we take this step, you're committed to working through the hard stuff instead of running when things get complicated. What hard stuff? Claire gave him a look that suggested he was being deliberately obtuse. Ethan, we've been dating for 3 months. We haven't even had a real fight yet. Is that bad? It's unrealistic. People who care about each other disagree sometimes. They have different opinions, different needs, different ways of handling stress. She stood and began organizing her tools. The fact that we haven't tested that yet makes me nervous. What do you want to fight about? Claire laughed, the sound bright in the small garage. That's not how it works. You don't go looking for conflict. Then how do we test? Whatever it is you think we need to test? Time, and honesty, and probably some situation that forces us to see each other under pressure. As if summoned by her words, Ethan's phone rang. The caller ID showed his sister's name. I should take this, he said. Diana never calls on weekends, unless something's wrong. Ethan, Diana's voice was tight with stress. I need a favor, a big one. What's going on? Mom fell and broke her hip. She's in the hospital in Phoenix and I'm flying out tonight, but I can't take the kids. Jason has soccer regionals this weekend and Emma has her piano recital. Ethan's chest tightened. His sister had 2 kids. Jason was 14, Emma was 12, and they were good kids, but he'd never been alone with them for more than a few hours. How long will you be gone? A week, maybe more. Mom needs surgery and then she'll need help getting home and settled. Diana's voice cracked slightly. I know it's a lot to ask, but I don't have anyone else I trust. Ethan looked at Claire, who was pretending not to listen while organizing the same set of tools for the 3rd time. Of course, he said. Bring them over whenever you need to. Thank you. I'm dropping them off in an hour. I've got an 8 o'clock flight. After he hung up, Claire looked at him with raised eyebrows. Overnight babysitting? A week of it. My mom broke her hip. I'm sorry. Is she going to be okay? Yeah, she's tough, but Diana needs to be with her and the kids can't miss school. Claire nodded. That's a lot of responsibility. I can handle it. But even as he said it, Ethan felt a familiar tightness in his chest. What did he know about taking care of teenagers? His house wasn't child-proofed. He didn't have food they'd want to eat. He didn't know their schedules or their friends or what they needed from him. I'm sure you can, Claire said gently. But if you need help, I've got it covered. Something in his tone made Claire pause in her tool organizing. Ethan. What? It's okay to ask for help when you need it. I don't need help. They're good kids, and it's only a week. Claire studied his face with the same attention she paid to a tricky engine problem. Have you spent a lot of time alone with them before? Some. The answer came out more defensive than he intended. How much is some? Enough. Ethan, he sighed. A few hours here and there. But how hard can it be? Kids need food, transportation, and supervision. I can provide all of that. Claire's expression suggested she thought he was oversimplifying things, but she didn't argue. Okay, but the offer stands. If you need backup, I'm here. Thanks, but I'll be fine. An hour later, Diana's SUV pulled into his driveway. Ethan watched through the window as his sister got out, followed by 2 teenagers who looked about as thrilled to be there as he felt to have them. Jason was tall for 14, all arms and legs and barely controlled energy. Emma was quieter, more reserved, but with the same dark eyes as her mother and aunt. They both looked uncertain as Diana led them to the front door. Uncle Ethan! Emma hugged him as soon as he opened the door. Jason settled for an awkward handshake. Okay, listen, Diana said, pulling a notebook from her purse. I've written down everything. Schedules, emergency contacts, dietary restrictions, homework assignments. Jason has soccer practice Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Emma has piano lessons Tuesday and Thursday. They both have friends they'll want to see, but check with the parents first. She handed him the notebook, which was surprisingly thick. There's money for food and activities. Emma's vegetarian this month. Don't argue with her about it. Jason eats everything but will probably live on cereal if you let him. Diana, breathe. Ethan took the notebook. We'll be fine. I know, She looked at her kids, both of whom were examining his living room with the slightly awed expression of people entering a museum. Call me if anything goes wrong. Anything at all. Mom, we'll be fine, Jason said, flopping onto the couch. Uncle Ethan's got a giant TV and a pool. This is basically vacation. Diana looked like she wanted to say more, but her phone buzzed with a text. That's my Uber. I have to go. She hugged both kids fiercely, whispered something to each of them, then was gone, leaving Ethan alone with two teenagers in a house that suddenly felt way too quiet. So, he said, are you guys hungry? Starving, Jason said immediately. There's nothing good here, Emma added, having apparently conducted a mental inventory of his kitchen. You have, fancy cheese and wine and vegetables I can't pronounce. Ethan looked at his refrigerator through their eyes and realized they were right. His idea of meal planning was keeping ingredients for maybe 3 different dishes on hand. Pizza? He suggested. Yes, Jason pumped his fist. Can we get one without meat? Emma asked. Of course. The pizza solution worked for dinner, but as the evening progressed, Ethan began to understand that Claire had been right about oversimplifying things. Kids, it turned out, were not small adults who just needed food and supervision. They were complex individuals with their own needs, schedules, and emotional requirements. Emma wanted to video call her best friend, but couldn't remember the Wi-Fi password. Jason needed help with a history report, but had left half his research materials at home. Both of them seemed to require constant interaction. Questions about his car collection, requests to use the pool, detailed explanations of why his house was so big and why he lived there alone. By 9 o'clock, Ethan was exhausted. Uncle Ethan? Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway as he was loading the dishwasher. Do you have any tea? Herbal tea? Mom always makes me chamomile before bed. He opened 3 different cabinets before finding a box of Earl Grey. Will this work? Emma made a face. That has caffeine. I can't have caffeine after 6 or I won't sleep. Right, of course. Ethan stared at his tea collection, all of which seemed to be caffeinated. Maybe hot chocolate? Do you have the kind without dairy? I'm trying not to eat dairy this week. Ethan felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he got when a business deal was spinning out of control. How had his sister made this look so easy? His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. How's the first night going? Before he could think about it, he was calling her. Hey, Claire answered on the second ring. Everything okay? Define okay, Ethan said, stepping onto the back deck for privacy. Emma needs herbal tea without caffeine or dairy. Jason's homework requires books we don't have, and I just realized I have no idea what time teenagers are supposed to go to bed. Claire's silence lasted just long enough to make him nervous. Do you want me to come over? I thought I could handle this. That's not what I asked. Ethan looked through the sliding glass door at Emma, who was now making herself a peanut butter sandwich, and Jason, who was sprawled on the living room floor surrounded by textbooks and loose papers. Yes, he said quietly. I could use some help. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Claire arrived with 2 grocery bags and a thermos. She hugged Emma, fist-bumped Jason, and somehow managed to make her presence feel natural and welcome rather than like backup being called in. Chamomile tea, she said, pulling a box from one of her bags, and almond milk for hot chocolate, and some snacks that won't make your mom worry about your nutrition. How did you know what to bring? Ethan asked. I was 12 once, and my mom worked nights sometimes, so I spent a lot of time figuring out what I needed to feel comfortable in other people's houses. She moved through his kitchen with easy efficiency, making Emma's tea and helping Jason organize his homework materials. Within an hour, both kids were settled, Emma with her tea and a book, Jason with his history report finally taking shape. Bedtime is 10 on school nights, 10:30 on weekends, Claire said quietly as she and Ethan cleaned up the kitchen. They'll push for later, but that's the boundary. How do you know that? I asked them what their mom's rules were. It was such a simple solution that Ethan felt embarrassed for not thinking of it himself. I was overthinking it, wasn't I? You were treating it like a business problem instead of a relationship problem. What's the difference? Claire dried a glass and set it in the cabinet. Business problems have solutions you can implement unilaterally. Relationship problems require understanding the other people involved and working together to find solutions that work for everyone. And that includes 12 and 14-year-olds. Especially 12 and 14-year-olds. They're people, Ethan. Small, inexperienced people with big feelings and very little control over their circumstances. Ethan looked into the living room, where both kids were quietly engaged in their respective activities. I want to be good at this. You will be, but it's okay to admit when you need help. I'm not used to needing help. I know. Claire touched his arm gently. But these kids need you to figure it out, and that's more important than your pride. The words were said with kindness, but they hit home like they were meant to. Ethan thought about his automatic response when Diana had called, "I've got it covered," and realized he'd been more concerned with appearing capable than with actually being helpful. "Stay tonight?" he asked. "Please?" "I know it's asking a lot, but yes." Claire's answer was immediate. "But not because you can't handle it, because teamwork makes everything easier." That night, as they got both kids settled in their respective guest rooms, Ethan watched Claire interact with Emma and Jason with natural warmth and clear boundaries. She didn't try to replace their mother or become their friend. She just offered the kind of steady adult presence that helped them feel safe in an unfamiliar situation. "You're good at this," he said as they finally made it to his bedroom. "I like kids. They're honest about what they need, and they respond to genuine care." Ethan thought about that as Claire borrowed one of his t-shirts and settled beside him in bed. Not next to him. They'd been careful about physical boundaries, especially now with kids in the house, but close enough that he could feel her warmth. "Claire? Thank you for coming over, for knowing what they needed when I didn't." "You're welcome. But Ethan?" "Yeah?" "Tomorrow you're going to handle breakfast by yourself, and the school drop-off, and whatever comes up during the day." Panic fluttered in his chest. "What if I mess up?" "Then you'll figure out how to fix it. That's what adults do." Her confidence in him was both reassuring and terrifying. "And if I really need help?" "Then you call me. But try first. Trust yourself." As he drifted off to sleep, Ethan thought about the difference between trying to control a situation and trying to understand it, about the way Claire had asked the kids what they needed instead of assuming she knew, about the fact that asking for help hadn't made him feel weak. It had made him feel connected. Maybe, he thought, as sleep took hold, there was more than one kind of restoration happening in his life.